Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First, to Peter Kiernan, who was counsel to the governor. I was serving as Attorney General. He was a great counsel to the governor. He was a great colleague to me as Attorney General. Let's give Peter a round of applause. To former First Lady Michelle Page Paterson, thank you for being here. Thank you for your words. Thank you for your service. To Alex and Ashley, thank you very much for taking the time to come up. To Roger Derrick, who is the artist, and I'm going to leave the governor for last, obviously. We also have a number of colleagues with us who we served with. Former Attorney General Bob Abrams is here. Pleasure to be with you, Bob. Former Borough President, now MTA Vice Chairman, Fernando Ferrer. Pleasure to be with you, President. Assemblyman Denny Farrell. Senators Joe Griffo, Senator Malcolm Smith, and former Senator Joe Bruno. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you, Joe. For those of you who haven't been to the Capitol before, first, welcome to Albany. It's a strange new world when people come to Albany to get away from the snow, isn't it? For those of you who haven't been to the Capitol before, welcome. This is a magnificent building. It's one of New York's hidden treasures. Not enough people see the Capitol, especially from down south. It was finished in 1899 by Teddy Roosevelt, opened it up. After 30 years of construction and design and new design and more construction, Teddy Roosevelt finally said enough is enough and wanted it concluded in 1899. It was a magnificent monument that the founding fathers were building to the state of New York and to public service. They had hundreds of stone carvers from all around the world who came, all different stone from all across the world. And they really wanted to build what turned out to be the most expensive public works in the nation at the time, because they were proud of what they were doing. They were the great state of New York, and they were building a temple to public service. So pleasure to have you here. This is called the War Room. It celebrates New York's warriors, Theodore Roosevelt, some of the great generals of all times, General Warren, General Schuyler, and the fourth corner is for the unknown soldier. We're going to take you into the Hall of Governors shortly. Hall of Governors was just redone. Hall of Governors was a random collection of some of the governors of the state, in no particular order. And it's a very long hallway, but schools from all across the state would come up to show the school children the Capitol and the Hall of Governors. And you would see these classes of school children walking up and down the hall, the teacher straining to find some kind of logic to what she was showing them. You know, these random pictures of old white men scattered around the hallways. So we redid the whole thing, and we put it now in a chronological timeline, so you can walk around the hall and you're walking through history and you see the dates and you see what was going on. And today, this portrait will actually complete the Hall of Governors. It's been underway for 3 years. We were missing 2 portraits. We found all the other portraits for all the other governors somewhere across the state. And we had 2 portraits missing that I wanted to hang. One was David Paterson. One was my father. I called the easy one first. I called David. And I said, you know, David, we're finishing the Hall of Governors. I would love to make sure your portrait is in the gallery. And you know how quick and facile David is. He came right back and he said, are you sure you don't have to be dead first? Good question. If you did, it would pose certain practical problems. We did a little quick research and we found that there is actually no controlling legal authority on whether or not you have to be dead before they hang your portrait. So we are going to construe the law to allow us to hang the portraits of living people. So David agreed to do the portrait, and that's what started us on the road to today. I then called my father, and I said, okay, every other portrait is ready We just need you. He said, well, you don't have David Paterson. I said, no, I do. He can live and he can hang at the same time. So my father, who had refused to do the portrait since he left, still refused to have his portrait done. We then came up with a very creative alternative, which is we had the portrait done without his knowledge from a picture, and we gave it to him as a birthday present. And it's one of those few birthday presents that you really can't return. You know, there's not a lot to do with it. So my father's portrait is up, and today Governor Paterson's portrait will be up, and that will really complete the Hall of Governors. And it's a special treat for me to be able to do this with Governor Paterson today. We both grew up at a kitchen table with true giants in this occupation, Basil Paterson and Mario Cuomo. And there's no secret that we wound up in public service. There's no secret how we got here. We had phenomenal role models and people who would speak about politics, and they were politicians, but politicians in the highest order. And they spoke about politics with a tremendous sense of pride. They believed deeply and passionately in public service. They believed in the principles of social justice and progressive leadership, and they believed in government as the vehicle for collective action. And they also believed that they had a responsibility to do everything they could do to advance that vision. And they did, and the gift that they gave us by the sheer power of their example was a love of public service and a belief in its potential. Now, as elected officials, we don't get to pick the circumstances in which we must govern. David Paterson certainly didn't pick his time to govern. Indeed, he was given 2 hours' notice that he was going to wind up being the governor of the state of New York. And when Governor Paterson took the tiller, the ship of state was headed into a storm. March 16th, Bear Stearns collapsed. March 17th, David Paterson became the 55th governor of the state of New York. And then, as you heard from Peter Kiernan, 14 days later, the state budget was due. Within months, Lehman collapsed, AIG was faltering, Wall Street was shaken to the core as banks started to fall like dominoes. The state's budget deficit went to $6 billion, one of the highest deficits ever. Governor Paterson's mission on behalf of the people of New York was clear, and it was not a journey for the faint of heart. This was a financial crisis unlike anything we had seen since the Great Depression. The state would need to make dramatic and immediate shifts in how it operated. Governor Paterson articulated a new path for the state in his inaugural address. He warned New Yorkers about the new reality we faced, and he took control of the budget process with more authority than any governor in the history of the state of New York had done. He innovated a new budget device known as budget extenders, which dramatically increased the governor's power in the budget process and shifted the balance of power so the governor was no longer subject to the legislative spending whims. Probably the single most powerful symbol of Governor Paterson's steadfastness was July 1st and July 2nd, 2010, when he literally vetoed the 6,700 bills Peter was speaking about, literally by his own hand, to make that point that this is a different day. 4 years later, we can all look back at that moment and say that Governor Paterson was right, because history has shown that his actions were prophetic. But Governor Paterson knew that he was right at that moment. And that, my friends, is called leadership. And that's what Governor Paterson evidenced, and we all owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude for that service. I often wonder whether I am maximizing the opportunity given to me by the people of the state of New York. Time goes by so quickly, and change comes so slowly. What mark will last beyond my tenure? Well, for Governor David Paterson, that is a very easy question. On April 24th, 2009, Governor Paterson signed the Drug Law Reform Act, reforming the Rockefeller drug laws, a terrible miscarriage of justice that went on for 45 years. Tens of thousands of New Yorkers were forced to serve mandatory minimum prison terms for nonviolent crimes. Governor David Paterson's reforms cut the number of black New Yorkers going to prison by half. That's what Governor David Paterson accomplished with that one act. Governor Paterson is also the first non-white governor of New York and the first governor with a visual disability. Like no other portrait in the Hall of Governors, Governor Paterson offers us a portrait of possibility. How many young people of color, how many young people with disabilities who may look into a mirror and see limitations will now look at this portrait and see a new vision of possibility. A portrait that says, here in this great state of New York, the nation's progressive leader, we seek to tear down all barriers and create a place where one is limited only by the extent of one's own imagination. In life, we are supported by those who come before us, and David Paterson stood on the shoulders of giants. There is no doubt about that. David Paterson stood on the shoulders of his father, Basil Paterson, a pioneer himself, also of Percy Sutton and Charlie Rangel and David Dinkins and Carl McCall, all pillars of progress. But David Paterson stood even taller, and he reached even higher, and he went even further, and in that journey, he lifted us all. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to give you the 55th governor of the state of New York, Governor David Paterson.